In the last lesson, that is in lesson 8.2, we discussed about types, we discussed about constants, and we looked at variable declarations. Okay. In this lesson, the question we're going to answer is what will happen if we have an arithmetic expression, let's say a equal to b plus c, and a is of int, b is of short, and c is of character. How is this expression going to be evaluated? So this question is we're going to answer by looking at a topic called as type conversions. So type conversions, the golden rule is always the lower type gets promoted to the upper type. Okay, so let's look at what is this one, what is this lower type and upper type. Okay, so in the floating point types, right? So the float is the lower type and long double is the upper type. So if there is any expression which has long double, everything else gets converted to long double. Okay, so that's the golden rule. So the next thing what we're going to look at is integer types. So all these are integer types. And unsigned long int is the upper type. So if you have an unsigned long int, everything else get converted into unsigned long int. So I'm going to delve into this, go more deeper by explaining with specific examples. Okay, let's have a look at few of the examples here. Sure. So, okay, for the sake of convenience, I have named the variables like this. So, when I say LD underscore long double, it is of type long double. And when I say F underscore float, it is of type float, and D underscore double is of type double. So, by looking at the variable, you will know which type it is of. Okay, and is especially very useful to explain things here. Okay, so here the rule we're going to use is very simple. If either of the operand is long double, convert the other to long double. As simple as that. Okay. Next, we're going to look at this expression. So here we have double. So the rule is if either of the operand is double, convert the other to double. So here the float and the int types get converted into double, and the result gets stored in d underscore double. So the next rule is if either of the operand is float, convert the other to float. So the short gets converted to float. Okay. So the next one, we're going to look at integer types now. Okay. So in integer types, if either of the operand is int, convert the other to int. So the char and the short gets converted to int. Okay. It's sort of getting repetitive because you sort of got the rule. Convert the lower type to the upper type. Okay. So that's what I'm trying to show you, that in any expression, okay, it's very easy to perform conversions. It's very easy. Now you have an unsigned long here. So if any expression the operand is unsigned long, the other operand also gets converted to unsigned long. So the int and the short also get converted to unsigned long. Okay. Next thing, let's say if you have a long, convert everything else to long. That's it. Okay. And now, now let's look at a bit more tricky issues. So the tricky issue I'm going to look at here is this thing. Let's say we're going to assign a character to an int. What happens if, for example, int is the bigger type and char is the shorter type? Okay. So when you're converting a character to int, basically what will happen is the character will get converted to int and nothing will happen. For example, that character ASCII value will get stored in the integer variable. But when you are converting an integer to a character, when you say char underscore char equal to I underscore int, so what's going to happen is this, the integer value will get truncated. So the leftmost bits will just get flipped off, and whatever, if the character is 1 byte, only the rightmost 8 bits will be stored into the character variable. So here is when truncation happens and loss of information happens. So when you convert an int to a char, there is going to be a loss of information because character is a smaller type and integer is a bigger type in terms of the bits it can accommodate. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to look at is what happens when you do similar thing with integer and float. So when you put a float into an int, this is a bit more trickier. I'm going to explain that. So if you put a float to an int, if you convert a float to an int, if that float value contains decimals, that decimals is going to be truncated. And if the float, whatever remains, is going to be can be represented in the range of the integer, then that it can be represented. If it cannot be represented in the range of the integer, then the result is undefined. That means the C standard itself does not define what's going to happen. Okay. So, but what's going to happen the other way around? Let's say when you're going to convert an integer to a float. When you convert an integer to a float, if the integer can be represented in the range of the float, again it will be represented. If it cannot be represented, again the result is undefined. So this will happen when in time instead of an integer you have a long or an unsigned long, and you cannot put the the value you have in unsigned long to float. That's when this problem will happen. Okay, now I'm going to delve a bit deeper into this type conversions, and I'm going to explain what's going to happen between conversions of signed and unsigned. That actually will get a bit more complicated, so I'm going to explain that too. Okay, so let's say you have a long, and you have a signed long, and you have an unsigned integer, and long is 32 bits. Okay, and unsigned integer is 16 bits. Now when I say -1l, that is -1 long, I'm comparing a long with unsigned int. Okay, now long is bigger and unsigned int is smaller. So what happens is this unsigned int 1, that is in the left part of the right part of the first expression, gets promoted to the long. So -1l will be smaller than 1 unsigned. Okay, but let's consider the second expression. What happens is -1l, -1 long, and 1 unsigned long. So this -1l gets converted to unsigned long. So this -1 long will be greater than the unsigned long. Okay, so this is what I had to explain about type conversions. The signed type conversions get a bit complicated. Okay, so that's okay. If you've got a bit of it, you'll get the rest in the future lessons. Okay, so that's what I had to say about type conversions. Okay.